Good afternoon, I'm Abe.
And I'm Frank. And today, we're animating the first half of Chapter 20, Girding for War, the North and the South, in Kennedy, Cohen, and Bailey's The American Pageant textbook. Abe, today do we have a special guest?
Yes, we have an AP teacher, Professor Clay. Mr. Clay, take it away.
Very well. Abe Lincoln was inaugurated president on March 4th, 1861, and declared there would be no conflict unless provoked by the South. Lincoln believed the North and South were inseparably bound for a number of reasons. Geographically, there were no natural boundaries between the North and South. Secession also raised questions such as how much of the national debt would be assumed by the South? And finally, how would the fugitive slave issue be resolved? Finally, European nations, however, would be delighted by secession. With the U.S. convulsed in war, the European colonies would be much safer, and imperialists would more easily be able to defy the Monroe Doctrine. Now, Frank, what finally led the two sides into war?
Well, as secessionist governments rose to power in the South, forts and federal arsenals were seized by the Confederacy. Soon, only two such forts remained, including Fort Sumner in Charleston Harbor. Now, Fort Sumner, only having a few weeks of food, provided Lincoln with an interesting dilemma. His first option was that he could allow the fort to run out of food and surrender. Not a very good option. His second choice was that he could send more weapons and soldiers to the fort, which would seem like an act of aggression to the South. And his third and best option, the one he chose, was to only send provisions, such as food. Unfortunately, the South felt that any assistance was tantamount to military aid, and on April 12, 1861, they opened fire on the fortress, thus beginning the Civil War. Lincoln immediately called for a 75,000-man militia and imposed a blockade on southern seaports. Virginia, Arkansas, Tennessee, and North Carolina joined the South, and the stage was set for civil war. But Abe, why were these border states so critical?
Okay, so first, Missouri, Kentucky, Delaware, Maryland, and West Virginia were all known as the border states. They were coveted by the North for three reasons. One, the border states possessed a white population greater than half that of the entire Confederacy. Two, their factories would double manufacturing capacity. Three, Kentucky and West Virginia had access to the Ohio River, which was an invaluable lane of shipping and transportation. Lincoln employed almost tyrannical methods to keep the border states loyal. In Maryland, for example, he declared martial law, and in Western Virginia and Missouri, Lincoln deployed troops. Overall, if Lincoln had mandated that the slaves be freed, the border states would certainly have seceded. So instead, Lincoln publicly proclaimed that the purpose of the war was not to free the blacks. The butternut region of southern Indiana, Ohio, and Illinois contained a hotbed of pro-Southern sentiment, and, therefore, the idea of an anti-slavery war was extremely unpopular there. Lincoln insisted that the purpose of the war was solely to save the Union. In the war itself, the majority of the 5 civilized tribes allied with the Confederacy after they were promised federal payments and the privilege of sending delegates to the Confederate Congress. Overall, the Civil War was a brothers' war. In many families, one son would become a Billy Yank and fight for the Union, while his own brother would fight for the Confederacy as a Johnny Red. So, Mr. Clay, could you tell me about the advantages of the North and the South?
Absolutely. First, let's list the advantages the South had over the North. Number 1, the South could fight defensively while the North would have to invade, conquer, and force the South back into the Union. 2, the South had many talented officers, such as Robert E. Lee and Stonewall Jackson. 3, Southerners, because of their lifestyle, made better soldiers than Northerners. Secondly, another larger point, however, the South did have one major disadvantage. Its lack of factories led to shortages of blankets, uniforms, and shoes, and many Southern soldiers starved. Overall, the economy was the North's greatest strength and the South's greatest weakness. But the North also had several other advantages. 1. It had many factories and thus possessed about 3/4 of the nation's entire wealth. 2. The North, with its superior navy, controlled the ocean, was therefore able to both establish a blockade against the South and trade with Europe for war supplies. 3. The North possessed much greater manpower, largely because of the tendency for immigrants to settle in the North rather than in the South. Finally, the North, unlike the South, also had one major disadvantage. Many Northern generals were incompetent, and Lincoln had to use a trial and error method to sift out the effective leaders. Moving on to Frank now. How did the South's reliance on international help break down?
Well, the Confederacy was relying, as you said, on foreign intervention from either France or Britain, since they felt that Europe would need their cotton. Unfortunately, several factors resulted in regicide for King Cotton. Now, the first of these was that the working class people of England and France had read Uncle Tom's Cabin, meaning they disagreed with the Southern policy of slavery. In effect, Uncle Tom helped Uncle Sam. Second, the South had exported a colossal amount of cotton prior to the Civil War, which resulted in England and France having stockpiled cotton to last them through the first years of the war. Third, by the time reserves of cotton began to run out, the North had recaptured cotton supplies and were more than happy to sell them to Europe. And fourth and finally, India and Egypt simply began to grow more cotton to cover the loss of the crop from southern importation. Also, the North was growing and exporting grain and corn, which Britain would lose if it joined the South. So it came down to either England and France wanting to feed their people or clothe them, and they chose to feed them. But Abe, can you tell me how Britain influenced the war?
Yes. Britain first intervened in the American Civil War with the Trent Affair, when a Union warship stopped a British steamer and captured 2 Confederate diplomats. The Trent Affair pushed the British to begin war preparations. Eventually, however, hostilities between the two nations cooled and Lincoln released the diplomats. Shortly afterward, the British once again provoked hostility by building commerce-raiding ships, most notably the Alabama. In total, the Alabama captured over 60 American vessels and forced the North to divert valuable naval ships from its blockade. And overall, Britain was the Confederacy's main naval base. Finally, Minister Charles Francis Adams convinced the British that building commerce-raiding ships was dangerous. But by this point, the British-built Confederate commerce destroyers had already crippled the Union's naval strength and had captured over 250 Union ships. Thank you for watching. Please like and subscribe.
And comment down below if you have any questions. We'll catch you guys next time in part 2.